Thanks, Stephen. Politicians had hoped they would strike a deal before stock markets opened in Asia, but still the standoff continues. Both the Democratic leader in the Senate and the Republican leader in the House are working on separate backup plans to raise the nation's debt ceiling. And right now, U.S. President Barack Obama is meeting with Democratic leaders at the White House. Politicians from both the Democratic and Republican parties spent the morning arguing their positions on U.S. television. The U.S. government is $14.3 trillion in debt, and the Treasury only has enough money to pay all its bills until August the 2nd. So let's take a look at how the numbers break down. The government will collect around $172 billion in revenues next month, yet it has to pay out about $307 billion in bills. Let's see how the revenues could be spent. The interest payments on U.S. borrowing come to $29 billion. Then there's Medicare and Medicaid. That's another $50 billion. Social Security payments will be $49.2 billion, while payments for active U.S. troops and veterans add up to another $5.8 billion. That means the government would only have $39 billion left to cover $158 billion worth of payments. And that's for defense contractors, food stamps, education, housing, and government department spending. I'm joined now from New York by Max Fraad Wolff. He's an economist and professor at the New School University. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We hear lots of doomsday talk and talk of Armageddon, etc., if there is no agreement. Is there some substance to this, or are we seeing an element of theater here?
Well, there's a heavy element of theater here. It's a self-imposed deadline. The U.S. government has raised the debt ceiling over 70 times in the past, never with this much theater or this much stress or this much last-minute gamesmanship. But there's a real crisis in the background here, which is the debt and the deficits that we've been accruing at an increasing rate that are increasingly unsustainable. And there's a crisis, if man-made, but no less severe, which is that the House and Senate have put themselves with the president a task which they are displaying to the world in ever greater depravity, their complete and total inability to execute on.
You know, we're hearing of some of the consequences if there is no agreement on raising the debt ceiling, that interest rates could rise, that the economy could slow down even further, etc. Assuming there's no agreement, are there any contingency plans in place to avoid what could be a complete meltdown?
It's a great question. It does get harder and harder to sustain faith every day, although I still do think we'll see an agreement before 2 August. If the U.S. government does not reach an agreement to raise the debt ceiling, then about 55 cents of the dollar of what the U.S. government spends will be sustainable through revenues, and about 45 cents in the dollar will not. And that will create a shock wave that will pass through the U.S. and global economies on a massive scale. And I certainly hope that a month from now we can look back on this and still have to guess what it would have been like. If this occurs, some of the most severe damage will occur in and around Washington, D.C., the state of Virginia, and the state of Maryland, which are right next to Washington, D.C., where literally the regional economies are highly dependent, both directly and indirectly, on state employees and checks. And that's not even to begin to speak about the indirect value or the fact that the U.S. government is in the business of writing about 50 million checks a month. So no part of the U.S. or global economy will be spared the shockwaves, but that which is economically and in some cases physically closest to ground zero, which would be Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, have already begun the sort of Armageddon planning in case the increasingly likely, if unthinkable, disaster occurs where they really can't get everything in order and 45% of government spending of the United States somehow drops out in its ability to be sustained beginning at midnight on the 2nd of August.
You mentioned there that the federal government writes out something like 50 million checks. Surely that will have a knock-on effect as it ripples through the economy.
It will be a massive effect. It'll shoot a shockwave into the global financial system, which will be larger than the immediate impact of 9/11 or the failure of Lehman Brothers in September of 2008, partly because the U.S. dollar will be in heavy movement, U.S. treasuries will be in heavy movement, some state bonds in the United States, as well as Fannie and Freddie mortgage-backed securities, or bonds made up of U.S. home mortgages, all of which will have the full faith and credit of a government that the world won't have full faith and credit in, effective August 3rd without a deal. And we've already been promised by the rating agencies that there'll be a downgrade of U.S. sovereign debt if no deal is struck.
Okay, sir. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.